Is depression and anxiety the new normal because of COVID-19? Come find out on Jimmy Rants today. Click on that little box down there in the corner to watch this on IGTV. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, if you want to engage live in the content, you got to go follow me. I'm over on Instagram. I am at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, you can engage live as I turn the camera around. I was sitting there trying to pin the topic, and the camera decides to turn around and show you my lights. So sorry about that. It is a live show, so that proves this is live. So where was I? Oh yeah, Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, you can engage live and have a good time and see even when Jimmy Moore flubs up. It's awesome. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page, so thank you guys for being here today. And finally, we also have the simulcast on my YouTube live channel, so thank you guys, the Jimmy Rants family. We are here today. Thanks so much for joining us. If you missed the live here on Instagram, we do put it up on IGTV, so you can watch that on demand whenever you want to watch it. If you happen to miss when we go live at 11 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, sometimes we do a 5 p.m., sometimes we do the weekend, but definitely we try to put the focus at 11 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. We also put it over at YouTube. If you'll type in the keyword Jimmy Rants, you can find the past episodes. And then finally, we have a website. In case anything ever happens to social media, we have a website that houses all of these videos over at JimmyRants.com. While you're there, you can also click on my Patreon. If you like what we do here, definitely helps to support the work we are doing. Okay, you guys, so you might have heard a lot of people are struggling right now. They're having anxiety, they're having depression and other mental health issues. And we are now being told that because of this coronavirus COVID-19 thing, and because people have had to go through extraordinary circumstances in their lives that are unlike anything we've ever seen before, it's unprecedented in the history of modern society, what we're having to go through, that this anxiety and depression that everybody seemingly is feeling is simply the new normal. Do you guys buy that? Do you guys buy that the stress we're under right now is something that's special, that's unique from any other stressor in your life? And maybe because I've been through some stuff in my life, through childhood trauma and some just various circumstances in my own life, I'm not seeing this COVID-19 as anything that's extra on top of just the general life things that would cause you to be anxious or depressed. And the move right now is to get us to all think we're anxious, we're all depressed, thus we all need medication, and we all just need to accept that this is our new normal. Well, I'm going to call BS on that one. I don't think anxiety and depression has to be the normal for anybody. Yes, I'm going to acknowledge some people are not handling the stress of all this right now. Some people are not handling the uncertainty of all this. Some people are scared half to death, the fear. And a lot of it is stoked by the constant news, like they just reported, oh, we passed 100,000 deaths, a major milestone in the. And they're just trying to keep you in this constant anxious state. And what I want you to do is back away, take a deep breath, assess the situation. Why do you feel anxious? Why are you depressed? Has anything about your life other than this circumstance with COVID-19 actually changed? Now, for some of you, yes, it has. You've lost your job. What is it now? 40 million people without are drawing unemployment. You've had changes in your life. I've seen it as well. I'm used to having sponsors that help me support my work. And quite frankly, you guys, a lot of those sponsors are just silent as all get out right now. I've got a few good ones, but it's not near enough. And it's putting me in a position to have to make some decisions about my business and about what I do. And it's all good. I'm rolling with it because I realize not that this is the new normal, but that this is a new situation that requires me to adapt and be resilient. And this is why I think so many people are falling into this anxiety and depression is they did not prepare themselves for when things go awry. And again, this was a mindset long before COVID-19 came around. This was a mindset that was in place of not really knowing how to handle situations and take things in stride. And I realize it. It's a big skill to try to do that. And it's something I've worked on for many years. And I still have struggle with it from time to time, but you get better at it the more you do work at it. So I've got a couple of stories here today that I want to go over. One is about depression being the new normal out of the Atlantic. I also have another one about anti-anxiety meds on the rise and the risks that are involved with that. But this whole idea that, well, we're all anxious, we're all depressed, and we just need to treat it with drugs and move on with our life because this is the new normal. I'm sorry, they pretend like that there's no other way to bring your anxiety and depression under control other than a prescription medication that didn't exist 100 years ago? Really? How did those people in 1918 deal with the Spanish flu pandemic? Did they have anti-anxiety medications that they popped in their mouth? No. They learned stress management, deep breathing, probably eating better. This is a big one too. They never talk about the nutritional component as to why you have these mental health issues, this anxiety, this depression. It all goes back to what you put in your mouth. Whether we want to admit it or not, carbs are causing damage to our brain. Fat, the lack thereof, is also causing damage to your brain. Your brain's 70% fat, and yet so many people aren't eating enough fat, or if they are eating fats, they're eating inferior fats that are the highly processed vegetable oils and not real whole food-based fats like coconut oil and butter and ghee and lard and all the rest. And so these are all contributors to this anxiety and depression. Well, and maybe a lot of you guys eat keto, carnivore, and you're kind of handling this pretty well. Well, you need to thank your diet for that. Ketones are also probably helping to stabilize your mood, which is something I've talked about for many years since my book Keto Clarity. The mood stabilizing effects of ketosis cannot be talked about enough, and especially during a time like this. All right, let's get to this story here from the Atlantic. The headline says, "Is everyone depressed? Suddenly, many people now meet the criteria for clinical depression. Doctors are scrambling to determine who needs urgent intervention versus who is simply the new normal." Guys, I don't know about you. I am already over that phrase, the new normal. Do not tell me that anxiety and depression is normal, new or otherwise. It's not. And anybody that tells you, well, we just have to put up with this, just take your pill and move on with your life. I'm not accepting that. It's not the new normal to me. The word I keep hearing is numbness, not necessarily a sickness, but feeling ill at ease, detachment, removal from reality. Deb Hawkins, a tech analyst in Michigan, describes the feeling of being stuck at home during the coronavirus pandemic as sleepwalking through my life or wading through a physical and mental quicksand. Even though she has been living in what she calls an introvert heaven for the past 2 months, at home with her family, grateful they're in good health, her brain has just simply dissented. I feel like I have two modes, barely functioning and boiling angry. Do you find yourself vacillating between those extremes of, okay, I guess I'm just going to get through the day, just kind of barely kind of going through the motions, and then kind of going, well, why? Why are we still in this? And what's going on? If you're in that mindset, you can check yourself. Like, I don't think we have to stay, and our bodies are not designed, you guys, to stay in this constant sympathetic state. And this is something you don't hear a lot of people talking about, the sympathetic state versus the parasympathetic state. When you are in a sympathetic state, you are turning on so many negative hormonal responses in your body People wonder, why am I gravitating to wanting to eat junk food? Sympathetic response. Why do I feel aches and pains in my body? I haven't really done anything, I haven't worked out. Sympathetic response. Why am I getting a headache? Why am I having, various things happening in the body? Sympathetic response. Type 1 diabetics saying, oh my gosh, my blood sugar, I can't get it down and I'm not eating anything different. Sympathetic response. We gotta chill. We gotta learn these lessons. And if you learn nothing else from this time of uncertainty, this time of quarantine, this time of just being outside the norm of what our regular lives are like, learn this skill, because this skill is going to serve you well moving forward in your life. Because yes, coronavirus, COVID-19 is certainly something that was unprecedented and came out of nowhere, but let's not pretend like we don't have surprise things that happen in our life all the time. And don't you want to learn how to cope with those things long before they hit, so that when they do hit, you handle them well? I think we all want that. Many people are even more deeply affected. Michael Falcone has run an acupuncture clinic for the past decade in Memphis, Tennessee. When he temporarily shut it down, the toll on his mental health was immediate. I went into a pretty instant depression when I realized that my actual purpose was disintegrating. He began spending his days staring at bookshelves, and we exchanged emails for a few weeks. And while his notes have been full of whimsical musings about adjusting to his new life at home, one included a jarring line. I've lost faith in myself. I don't know if I can actually justify taking up space and resources. When you feel yourself getting it down into that deep, dark pit, and I know people in my own life that when they go down way hard. And when they go down, it's almost like they become an entirely different person altogether. And you try to talk to them as if they're your friend, and you quickly realize that friend that you knew has gone into a place in their head that I personally don't allow myself to get that way anymore. I have come out of some darkness in my life from my past, and I just don't go down that path. But there's a lot of people, they get triggered by one little thing and then spiral out of control. And maybe that's what they're referring to in this article. It's real, I suppose, you guys, and we need to acknowledge that there are people like that. But is this widespread? Is it rampant? Is anxiety and depression just requiring you to go on a bunch of medications and just accept this as your new life? I don't think it has to be an inevitability. After I confirmed with him that he had no intent to harm himself, I recommended that he seek out medical help. Given the unprecedented circumstances we're in, I'm not sure whether I under or overreacted, or even what help should look like. The pandemic is a moment of historic loss: unemployment, isolation, stasis, financial devastation, medical suffering, hundreds of thousands of deaths globally. Suddenly, droves of people are being thrown into this state, feeling lost and hopeless and depressed. And maybe we've all gone through those moments. I mean, I suppose we all have tried to process this at some point over these past few months. What's it mean? Where are we going? But how many people stay in that state? And the bigger question is, why do some people overcome that? And why do other people do that spiral out of control in a negative land to the point of potentially harming themselves? Over the past month, Jennifer Lieferman, a researcher at the Colorado School of Public Health, has documented a tidal wave of depressive symptoms in the United States. The rates that we're seeing are just so much higher than the norm. They recently found that people in Colorado have, during this pandemic, been 9 times more likely to report poor mental health than usual. About 23% of people in Colorado have symptoms of clinical depression. That's 1 in 4 people. As a rough average during pre-pandemic life, about 5 to 7% of people meet that criteria for a diagnosis of depression. Now, depending on how you define the condition, orders of magnitude more people do. Robert Klitzman is a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. He extrapolates from a study out of China, and he estimates about 50% of the U.S. population is experiencing depressive symptoms. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Half of you guys watching this right now have depressive symptoms? Like, how does that manifest? And what are the causal factors? Obviously, there's a lot of ways to look at this, because people come from all sorts of walks of life. People come with all sorts of nutritional things, lifestyle things. So it's hard to think that my audience of Jimmy Rants, half of you guys, would be in this state. But I'm not so naive to think that because you eat keto, because you do things that are healthier, that you're not dealing with this. Plus, are we talking about a constant state of depressive symptoms or moments? Because if you have moments and you come out of those moments unscathed, I don't think you can count that as being in a state of clinical depression. When I think of someone in clinical depression, I think of someone who's in a constant state of depression to the point of not desiring to live anymore, get suicidal. That's a dangerous state to be in. So I would love to know how they're classifying the 50% estimation. We're witnessing the mental health implications of massive death and disease. This has the effect of altering the social norm by which depression and other conditions are defined. Essentially, this throws off the whole definition of what depression means. And again, I don't think we need a definition of a word. We just need to see, are people overcoming this, or are they falling prey to it? That's the key here. And it's the ones that are falling prey to it and not getting out of their deep, dark pit that I think we need to be most concerned about zeroing in on. Feelings of numbness, powerlessness, hopelessness are now so common as to verge on being considered normal. I just don't buy this whole idea that all of these things now become normal. What is it about COVID-19, other than everybody's experiencing it at the same time? What is it about this stressor that's different than every other stressor in your life? What if you lose a close family member? That's a stressor. What if you lose your job in the regular day-to-day? That's a stressor. What if you have domestic disturbances and things going on in your family life? That's a stressor. Like, why suddenly does COVID-19 become this, oh, this is the new normal? No, it's another stressor that you deal with in your life. I'm not understanding why we have to accept that this is somehow the new normal. What we are seeing is far less likely an actual increase in the disease of the brain, rather than a series of circumstances drawing out a similar neurochemical mix. This is what poses the diagnostic conundrum. Millions of people are exhibiting signs of depression, and they now have to discern from temporary grieving versus a medical condition. Those at home Googling symptoms need to know when to seek medical care and when it's safe to simply try baking some bread, which, okay, come on. The point being, try doing something relaxing at home. Clinicians, meanwhile, need to decide how best to treat people with these new or worsening symptoms, to diagnose millions of people with depression, or to more aggressively treat the social circumstances at the core of so much of the suffering. We need better understanding of dealing with circumstances as they happen in our life. And again, COVID-19 is not the first traumatic thing that's happened in people's lives. Let's stop pretending like this is an unprecedented thing that would just drive you into depression and anxiety, that would force you to go on medications because this is the quote new normal. It's not. Clearly articulating the meaning of medical depression is an existential challenge for the mental health profession and for a country that does not ensure its people health care. If we fail, the second wave of death from this pandemic will not be directly caused by the virus. It will take the people who suffer mentally from its reverberations. From the very beginning of this, you guys, I have been making the point that I think the mental health effects of this COVID-19 pandemic is going to be far, far worse than the actual death and malaise experienced by those people who have gotten COVID-19 itself. Because so many more millions upon millions, maybe tens of millions of people are dealing with this very thing they're talking about here. And it's not going away anytime soon. Even when this is over, which is no time soon, the health effects, both physically and mentally, are going to last years, decades into their life. And we need to acknowledge that. But we also need to be setting up resources that would allow for these people to get the help that they need. I can tell you one thing that I personally have done, besides keeping a positive attitude, besides staying away from the media coverage, the constant media coverage about COVID-19, besides trying to do all the things from a relaxation standpoint here in my home in South Carolina, all of those things for sure, I'm just trying to stay focused that this is not going to last forever, and that at the end of the day, we're all going to survive and come out of this. Our ancestors went through a whole lot more trauma than we are right now. Like, think about the greatest generation, World War II. Even think about those people who went through the 1918 pandemic. Like, think about all of the people and what they've overcome, and how much better our technology is now to keep us connected and all this kind of stuff. We are in a lot better place. One other thing that I've done, by the way, is I have a life coach who is a licensed therapist. And if you don't have someone in your life like that you can talk to and get really good, professionally trained mental health specialist to help you, you need to get one. And she's been amazing. I've had her since before my sabbatical last year, and she has been wonderful in keeping things in perspective for me about some of the things I dealt with my childhood trauma. And then during this COVID-19 thing, I've handled it well, because a lot of the things she taught me in the midst of my sabbatical, I'm applying now. So it was like good skills that now are applicable to this situation. And again, learn skills now so that when the next thing hits, next whatever thing in your life hits that's big and traumatic, you don't fall into anxiety, you don't fall into depression, and you don't think that suddenly you're in some kind of a new normal. Depression can take erratic courses. Some predictable patterns exist. No two cases are exactly alike. Depression can percolate for long periods, and then they can quickly become very severe. Some people will barely notice, and others will be tested to the extreme. So Andrew Solomon is the author of The Noonday Demon, an Atlas of Depression. He groups people based on 4 basic ways that they're responding to this COVID-19 crisis. So see if you recognize yourself in these. 2 of them are very straightforward. The first are the people who are drawing on huge stockpiles of resilience, there it is, and they're truly doing okay. I would say I'm in that category. When you ask how they feel, they say, yeah, I'm fine. And they actually mean it. In the second group, at the opposite end of things, are those people who already have a clinical diagnosis of a major depressive disorder, or a persistent version known as dysthymia. Right now, their symptoms are at a high risk of escalating. They develop what some clinicians call double depression, in which the underlying disorder coexists with a new layer of fear and sorrow. So they were already struggling before this, and now they got all the everything that comes with this crisis added on top of it. Such people may need higher levels of medical care than usual, and they may need to seek hospitalization to help. So what about the other 2 categories? They're kind of a gray area. One group consists of the millions of people now experiencing depressive symptoms in a very real way, but who nonetheless will return to their baseline eventually, as long as these symptoms are addressed. People in this group are in urgent need of basic interventions to help create routine and structure. Those might involve regularizing your sleep, your food intake, your minimizing alcohol and other substances, exercising, avoiding obsession with the news, and cutting back on otherwise aimless habits that might be easier to moderate in normal times. So what they're saying is, maybe you have just a little bit of kind of anxiety, anxiousness that's just percolating beneath the surface. Not enough to be something that's major, not enough for you to really kind of go, oh, okay, I need to address. It's more like, all right, what's happening? Like, you don't really know what's happening. Do you find yourself in that area? I think a lot of people are in that area, that you know something's going on, you can't quite put your finger on it, but you realize, okay, this is my wake-up call to get my house in order, to just deal with situations a little better than I normally do. And I think a lot of people are there right now. So how about that fourth group? The fourth group encompasses people who are starting to develop clinical depression. So this is people in that group I just talked about advancing a little further. More than simply a wellness regimen or a Zoom call with their friends, they need a medical intervention. They may have seemed fine and had adequate resilience over normal times to deal with all the normal difficulties, but they've always had a propensity to have a move towards depression. Solomon describes this group as hanging on the precipice of what could be considered pathologic. It can be especially precarious because people who live in this state, what some researchers refer to as subclinical depression, have not dealt with depression before, and they may not have the capacity or resources to proactively seek treatment. I think one of the keys to avoiding getting to that category is self-awareness and recognition when you see yourself moving in that direction. The problem is most people don't see it happening until they're already down that deep, dark pit. This friend I was telling you about earlier, when she gets to that level, I hear a tone change in her voice. If I'm talking to her on the phone and I suddenly hear this specific tone in her voice, I always call her out right away. I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? Because I can hear it in her voice. And maybe you see this in loved ones in your life, that you notice them going down this deep, dark path. Maybe you can help them catch it. Maybe you can help them become self-aware so they're not triggered to go down this subclinical depression path. The earlier specific types of depression can be identified, the better people can be directed towards a proper treatment. The mental health system has already had barriers to identifying and helping people early on, issues like access to care and stigma. Yeah, you know what? I see a life coach who's a licensed mental health therapist. Sometimes people will try to attach a stigma. Oh, you're seeing a nut doctor. No, I'm seeing a therapist who can help me understand why my brain reacts the way it reacts to situations and improves that. There should be no stigma attached to that. We need to destigmatize things like this. In the midst of this pandemic, not only is the current population of psychiatrists insufficient to suddenly treat several times as many people as usual, but their basic capacities of diagnosis are always hindered by distance, volume, and all the confounding variables. It takes considerable wisdom to delineate who actually has a clinical condition and needs medication and therapy, and who's just stressed out within the bounds of a good mental health. That's a good point. Stressed out does not mean you have depression. Stressed out does not mean you're anxious. Stressed out just means, okay, there's something going on that's a little bit outside the norm and I'm trying to process. So don't think just because you have stress and you're stressing out a little bit, maybe you've got that little bit of kind of teetering on the edge of anxiety that could lead to depression, that suddenly you need to be on a medication, suddenly you need treatment. It could just be, all right, your body's learning to deal with the stress, and a lot of you will be able to overcome it without anything. Clinicians train for years looking for what that line is between the two, and placing people on one side or the other typically requires them to interview you for a long time, in which every element of the person's effect is noted. Even for people who manage to connect with clinicians, subtleties are difficult to read over a video call. This is why you see a therapist usually in person. When I see my life coach, who is a licensed therapist, we do a video chat, and we both have iPhones, and so it's pretty clear. She can see facial expressions, she can see mood, and things that I don't even realize I'm telling her just with my facial expressions. A trauma therapist named Megan Jarvis has been seeing a spectrum of reactions, including depression. Normally, she sends maybe one patient a year to the hospital for a pathologic response to trauma, but since March, she's had to put 4 people in the hospital. Typically, symptoms of depression are considered problematic if they're going on for 6 weeks after a traumatic event. The precise length is arbitrary, but is meant to generally help distinguish depression from periods of grieving, such as the death of a loved one. That distinction is largely useless in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, we're all going through that, she says, because we've been in this mode for more than 6 weeks. So now, the mental health professionals are trying to develop a new threshold. So not everyone with a cough goes to the hospital has COVID-19. Clinicians are working to identify and prioritize who's truly in need of help. Jennifer Rapke, the head of inpatient consultation at Upstate Golisano Children's Hospital in New York, has seen a surge in teenagers reporting suicidal ideation and instances of self-harm, like cutting. So she's been carefully turning away the less severe cases to make sure that inpatient facilities don't get overwhelmed. We're only seeing people who absolutely need to be here. And meanwhile, those with milder emerging cases are sometimes left in limbo. And that's a problem because that can then develop into the worse. The places we would normally send people, the things we would put in place to address the depression or anxiety in early phases, they don't exist or now they are unavailable. With less preventative and maintenance care accessible, people are more likely to come to hospitals in more severe states. During a crisis, extreme events like self-harm and suicide lag in time. At first, being anxious about the proximity of death or sad about the loss of a loved one is logical. Any other reaction would be bizarre. Our minds and bodies simply cannot stay in that state for too long. The United States was slow to test for coronavirus and COVID-19. Cases accumulated before we knew just how widespread it was, so that caused more people to become anxious and have severe depression as a result. All right, so they go on to talk about depression has always been here, and there's various ways that people have dealt with it. Today, depression, the clinical condition otherwise known as major depressive disorder, is defined by the American Psychiatric Association in its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a mood disorder. To get this diagnosis, a person must have 5 or more symptoms of the following nearly every day over a 2-week period. So here's how you know if you are, by the definition of clinical depression, you have this going on for 2 weeks in a row every single day. 5 or more. Fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt, a reduced physical activity level, indecisiveness or impaired concentration, a decreased or an increased appetite, and a greatly diminished interest or pleasure in all the regular activities of your life. Experts are trained to identify exactly how much impaired concentration or loss of energy is enough to qualify for diagnosis. The criteria are intentionally flexible enough to factor in patients' individualized circumstance. Outside of medicine, depression is often most cogently defined through a metaphor. Sylvia Plath once wrote, "The silence depressed me. It wasn't the silence of silence, it was my own silence." David Foster Wallace described depression as feeling that every single atom and every single cell in your body is sick. Even some clinical models reach for alternative ways of articulating despair beyond conventional medical models. James Hollis is a psychodynamic analyst, and he says that depression is sometimes the result of intrapsychic tension, a conflict between 2 areas of our psyche. This tension, he observed, says, when we're forced to try to make acquaintances with ourselves in new ways. So many Americans are dealing with this right now in the midst of this pandemic. People who define themselves by their work, and this is a big one, people who define themselves by their work can lose a basic sense of self if that work suddenly disappears. And a lot of people are like, well, they're getting unemployment benefits at home. But I'm like, okay, yeah, you get the money. But there's a lot of people that get satisfaction out of the work they're doing, purpose out of the work they're doing. Now, thankfully, I can come on here and do my Jimmy Rants. I can do my podcast and do all the work that I normally do. If you took away Jimmy Rants, you took away my podcast, you took away me writing books and all the things that define who I am, I don't know. I might go into a clinically depressive state as well, because people lose that basic sense of self in the work that they do. Many people regress at this time. Many also try to escape, whether by organizing a sock drawer, they bake some bread, even if they don't want to eat it, endlessly scroll through Instagram. Escapism is the key. For someone's response to a huge global pandemic to be like, I'm going to work out really hard, that's just as pathological and sort of disassociative if you went to bed and didn't get up for 5 days. For people whose response turns from acute anxiety into general malaise, they recommend facing the numbness head on. It's treatable, not necessarily with medication. You can create regimens of simple tasks to give you structure. This approach works for a lot of people. And so they talk about how you do that. Small steps like these will not work for everyone, but they may help many in a subclinical realm to mitigate the dangerous slide. The medical system is already stretched thin. These could buy some time to build capacity to care for these people who are dealing with this with severe and lasting symptoms. All right, so our nation is currently under stress. It may be that more people need some treatment. It may be that we need to, as a population, do more to try to relieve the stress. Now, I've done some other Jimmy Rants about how you stress relief and other things, deep breathing, yoga, exercise, things that are fun. Watch some comedy special on Netflix, just anything that would give you that pleasure center in your brain. Because when you go down into that deep, dark pit, you start taking anti-anxiety medications. I don't have a lot of time to read this other story out of WBUR.org, but basically people are taking anti-anxiety medications like never before. 40% are anxious about becoming seriously ill or dying from the coronavirus. 62% worried about the same thing for loved ones. And it's driving people to go take medications. A new study of over 3 million people found prescriptions for anti-anxiety medications spiked by 34%. I did a story about that previously. It's unfortunate because people were getting off of these drugs and now they're getting right back on them again. And so we don't have a drug deficiency, you guys. Anxiety and depression does not need drugs. Anxiety and depression is not the new normal. We will come out the other end of this. We just have to remain vigilant, remain self-aware, and remain kind. I think this is one final thing before I come to you guys. I think the negativity that exists online is also feeding into this. And I see it every single day where people say something seemingly innocuous or something's posted seemingly innocuous and people fly off the handle. And you're kind of going, okay, is this just the early sign of someone about to snap? Or maybe they've already snapped. Oh, snap. And then when they snap, they trigger someone else to snap, and it becomes this kind of domino effect of mental health stuff. And we can counter that by being the antithesis of snapping. We need to stay cool, calm, collected, together, and show that kindness, show that compassion. I have really worked very hard in my responses to people online, even when they're ugly to me, to be extraordinarily kind, extraordinarily conciliatory. It's still a work in progress for me to do that, because sometimes they say some really ugly things to me. But if we all responded in a kinder way, that would probably help with a lot of the anxiousness and depression that people are having. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. I'm going to pop over here to Instagram first, then over to Facebook, and finally on YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. Berkeley says, I'm looking forward to the group fast. So yes, thank you, Berkeley. June 1st, Monday, we start a 7-day group fast right here on Jimmy Rants. Still putting together kind of the protocol. I obviously want to go live every single day to offer up support, and I'll have various topics related to fasting all next week. So stay tuned. So thank you for that, Berkeley. The whole premise of anxiety and depression being the new normal is bunk. Tell this to those who have lived through wars. Exactly, Berkeley. I think that's the point, is this is not new. We have had things happen. Like, I think about all those World War II people. I mean, everybody thought the world was going to come to an end during World War II. Hitler was invading all over the place, and it just seemed like mass chaos. And then we came out of that and came out of that stronger. We need to look to that. Now, obviously, it's a totally different thing with the virus, but we need to look to that as an example of how we as a nation were so resilient. We overcame. And that needs to encourage you in the midst of this. Maybe you're dealing with some of the anxiety and depression. Maybe that gives you just enough confidence to say, yeah, okay, we're going to overcome this. This is not unprecedented that we won't be able to overcome it. So thank you for that. Kelly says they want you to get depressed, eat cake, candy, and chips, keep us sick because that makes us profitable. I have heard a lot of people say, oh yeah, they're doing all these things to purposely make us sicker. And I'm going, man, I don't want to believe that, but I hear you. I hear you. In 1918, I bet they naturally ate better on a regular basis. Oh, for sure. None of the industrialized food was even out there yet. Also, they were mentally stronger. They dealt daily with much harder situations of life and death and were more self-reliant. They also had just come out of World War I, or was at the tail end of World War I when this hit as well, back in 1918. Lavender says, in my opinion, pills are to help you get back on track while you work on healing and finding tools. People who get on pills stay on them. Yeah, that's the problem. Once you go on a medication, any medication, but especially mental health ones, they expect you to stay on it for life. And I suppose if people don't make other necessary changes to deal with why they had the clinical depression and anxiety to begin with, you will stay on it for life. My problem is this: why not get to the root cause of what's going on with the anxiety and depression rather than covering it up or manipulating the brain pathway with a medication? That's what I don't understand. I was put on them as a child and was on them till 21. I got off of them by my own choice. Also, antidepressants and birth control don't seem to mesh well, and they cause many issues. Yeah. Drug interactions are a you-know-what. Lavender says cashews, vitamin D, meditation, fresh air. These are things to get started with right away. A lot of anxiety is food-based, junk food, sugar, not healing with feelings, but finding coping mechanisms and good coping mechanisms. It really saddens me. I was listening to a podcast the other day about the cutting culture amongst teenage girls, especially. Girls will take razor blades and knives and scissors and cut on themselves as a way to cope with depression and anxiety that they're dealing with. I'm like, holy crap. And this is real, guys. It broke my heart when I was listening to that. Even after, says, a friend of mine was put on depression medication. She refused them later because she said they made her numb to her emotions. I want to feel. Like, even if I feel bad, I want to feel the feels. Because if you still feel, you can do something about it. Once you start becoming so numb you don't feel anymore, that is a bad place to be in. Body Shop Coach, a lack of coping skills. You're so correct that we will see repercussions of this for years to come. I think if someone is trying to pursue some kind of a medical career, I think clinical psychologists, I think therapists are going to be in high demand in these coming years. I cry for the collective mental health of the world after all this is over. Jack says, I don't even want to think about how bad things would be for me if I were still dealing with mental illness during this time. Keto healed me of my lifelong battle with anxiety and depression. That's awesome, Jax. Congratulations. Brittany says, movement, the most underused option to help with anxiety and depression. It's difficult to make the choice to do it, but the endorphins always help. Girl, you are so right. Like, people underestimate how good they'll feel. They just dread exercise. They dread movement. But guys, if you do just a little bit of movement, there are biochemical changes that happen in your body. Pain relieving kind of chemicals released, endorphins, as you said, the feel-good hormones all come out. Even though you're doing something that you think's miserable, just do a little bit of exercise and watch what happens. It is pretty spectacular. While I am for people getting help through meditation or medications when needed, there are things we can do to lessen the severity. I totally agree. Brittany also says the negativity online is a huge trigger for continued anxiety during this craziness. And I have noticed, you guys, and maybe those of you that are online, you've lost some followers. Well, I don't think it's anything you've done or said. I think there's just a lot of people that are self-aware enough of things that are triggering them, and they've gotten off of social media. I know here on Instagram, I've pretty much been stagnant right at 19,000 followers since all this went down. And so I pick up a few new, but then I lose a few because I think people are realizing that it's feeding into the negativity that's leading them down that path to depression and anxiety. I've been on anxiety and depression for seasons in my life. I believe they were necessary in the temporary. I did eventually choose to come off of the meds as I began to find other modalities that worked. Yes. All righty. Jack says, I used to cut myself in my early 20s, and Brittany said former cutter as well. That was a new one to me. Like, I had heard of people cutting, but I didn't realize it was guys, there's a new wave of it amongst teenage girls, especially. There's some boys that do it, but teen girls, I was shocked when I heard how normal cutting is. And of course, that podcast I listened to and just me kind of analyzing it, when you feel hurt so much in your emotional life, I think you feel like, okay, cutting myself and the physical pain from that can't be nearly as painful as the emotional pain that they're dealing with. And when they get to that level, that is a severe level of clinical depression and anxiety that needs help sooner than later. And then, of course, that leads possibly the next step to suicide, which is what they're seeing. I think I saw a statistic that the suicides in this one clinic in California have quadrupled of what they normally would be by this time of year. So it's really sad what's happening in that realm. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let me pop over here to my Facebook page, see what you guys have to say. What's up, you guys, about this topic here today? Welcome in, welcome in. All righty. I have anxiety panic attacks from wearing masks, says Angela. Yeah. And a lot of the changes to our normal day-to-day lives have caused people that as well. Angela says, no, medication does not work for me. I'm working on my hormones. Raising my fat seems to be helping. Getting the fat to go to your brain, where you are a fat head. I'm not insulting you, calling you a fat head. You are literally a fat head. 70% of your noggin is comprised of fat. And so I think eating more real food, whole food-based fats will do wonders for your mental health. Beef fat trimmings seem to be best for me, and they're cheap. Awesome. Tracy says, I felt down the first week this happened. Then I kicked myself in the butt, went out and did some yard work. So see, there you go. A little bit of movement helped get your brain back in order again. Alcohol use has increased as well. Paula says, yeah, another numbing agent for people dealing with their lives right now. Tracy says, this is not as bad as the molestation I went through as a child. I will deal. I think the childhood trauma that I went through, and I've talked about it many times before, emotional and physical abuse from my dad, helped me go through like what we're going through now. When you go through something like extremely bad, you kind of put things in perspective, that things that seem bad to a lot of people right now, they aren't as bad as you think they are. Martha says something has to be done to make mental health treatment affordable. Well, that's a whole nother subject altogether, but you're right, that feeds into this because it's not treated like a medical condition. Now, a lot of these medical professionals who are in the mental health profession, they have an ICD code that they can get reimbursed by insurance, but a lot of insurance companies aren't paying for mental health care unless you have some kind of a clinical diagnosis of some, brain chemistry being out of whack. So they have ways of getting it to be paid for, but you're right, it does need to be more affordable. I used to be so numb that I thought cutting would help me. I did that in my late 40s and early 40s, or late 30s, early 40s, was hospitalized when I started doing it deeper, hoping to accidentally kill myself. I'm glad I found keto carnivore. Wow, that was a new one when I started reading and hearing about cutting being kind of this way to cope with some mental health stuff. I'm like, whoa, I wouldn't even think about cutting myself. I would probably kill myself if I did it. Not trying to kill myself, but I guess it's more real than I realized. Martha says every day starts with at least a half-hour walk for me. I don't do anything except feed the cats before I walk. Well, that's awesome. All right, thank you, Facebook. Let's pop over to my YouTubers. What's up, guys? See what you have to say about all this. Shirley says, I've had a lot of stressful situations happen over the past few years that I now see was a test of mental strength. I'm so proud to say that I defeated them, and I've been chill completely during this COVID-19 thing because of that. That's awesome. So awesome. When the world appears out of control, you still have control over how you react. I've taken up painting and a new lifting program instead of just scrolling through Facebook and YouTube. Well, I'm grateful you guys make time to come watch me on Jimmy Rants, but that's great advice. Get away from where you're being triggered and becoming self-aware of when you're going down this path where you find yourself going into a depressive state, where you find yourself becoming anxious, where you've never been anxious in your life before. So if you start to have those issues pop up, just be aware of them and learn to deal in the moment. I think what happens is we don't immediately recognize what's going on, and then suddenly we're screaming at our spouse, we're screaming at our kids, we're flying off the handle, and we don't know why we're suddenly a different person seemingly. All right, let's come back over here to Instagram, see if there's any final thoughts. Jack says she started cutting because the pain of the emotional stuff became numbness and I needed to feel. And so, wow, that's interesting. Lavender Love says keto. My niece dealt a lot with that. I hope you're finding other ways. Yeah, I think a lot of people are finding other ways to deal, but it's a real situation we need to acknowledge exists out there. And I'm glad to share it here if that's news to any of you here today on Jimmy Rants. So, anxiety, depression, they want us all to be on drugs for it. They want us all to accept this as the new normal. But I don't think it has to be. I think what we need to do is use this as our wake-up call to determine when we're going down that deep, dark path in our minds and to take corrective action sooner than later. And this is where you can help those people in your life that you know are susceptible. We all know who the people are that are emotionally teetering. You just know they're one really bad experience away from doing something really bad or going down a path that will not be productive for them. And we need to help those people. The people you care about, you need to check in on them. You need to literally be that lifeline for them so they don't do something that they either go down this path of anxiety and depression, which could lead to suicide, could lead to other destructive behavior. It needs to be corrected sooner than later. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. As always, you can engage live in the content, but you got to go follow me right here on Instagram. I'm at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you are there, engage live. We go live Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Sometimes we throw a 5 p.m. Eastern, sometimes on the weekend, but almost always Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on Instagram Live. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page. Carol says Maria Emmerich has a great post today on cholesterol and depression. Oh, okay, thank you, Carol. Go check out Maria. I think it's mariamindbodyhealth.com is her website. So thank you for that. We also simulcast live over here on my YouTube stream. So thank you guys for being here today as well. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay on IGTV right here on Instagram. We also throw them up over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. And finally, jimmyrants.com is the official website for this show. Go there. You can see all the past episodes there in archive form. And if you like what you see here, we do have a Patreon page. Please click on that. And whatever you feel like this show is worth to you, we would appreciate any support you could give us here on Jimmy Rants. That's it for now, you guys. I'll be back again real soon. Bye.